Participation, right? You're going to be a part of the live feed. I just wanted you guys to be more nervous than me.
All right, welcome. Thank you everybody for joining today. My name is David Russell Jensen. My Tlingit name is Shangukeidí. I work here at Sealaska Heritage as our development officer. Today is one of several free presentations of Northwest Coast Raven stories. You can view the full schedule online at sealaskaheritage.org. Sealaska Heritage is committed to providing accessible community programming, but none of it would be possible without the support of donors. You can contribute online at sealaskaheritage.org/donate. Today's lecture is presented by Kanosh, who will be telling Raven stories taught to him by his mentors, Arnold Booth, Barbara Fawcett, and others. Some of the stories are included in the Metlakatla Indian Community's Tsimshian Tales book series. Throughout his journey to keep his culture alive, Kanosh uses Raven stories in his culture classroom to teach some lessons on how to be a good human being. Kanosh will tell stories that show Raven's not so good behavior as an example of what not to do. He'll be sharing several stories, and there's an opportunity for questions at the end. For those tuning in online, you can take your questions in the chat. Please welcome Kanosh. Thank you.
That song was a part of a song that we call The Rising Tide. Now, the previous storyteller that was here, Johon Atkinson, told the story of Tide Woman. Now I'm making connections to the other storytellers and my mentor, Arnold Booth, who taught me most of these stories, and he wanted a song and a dance specifically to show the rising tide. As the dancers go, the waves come in and they go back out. Because together, as a people, if we work together, we can rise and do anything, but separate and apart, we all fall down. And this is a lesson that I teach the kids in the elementary school where I work. And then another story I'll be telling today was taught to me by Barbara Fawcett. Now, Raven, the great trickster, the one that brought us the sun, the moon, and the stars, he was wandering around the world. And as he came upon a valley, he walked into this valley and he saw this small house. And he's always hungry. So he says, I'm going to go there and see if they have anything for me to eat. He gets to the house and he stands outside the door, and a man comes out and he says, oh, hey, my friend, come on in. My wife will fix us something to eat. He gets into the house, and once he gets into the house, he realizes that this is the house of the deer people. Now, back then, all the animals could transform into human beings, and they would behave like human beings. So Raven, he comes along, and he sits down at the place that was set for him, and the man's wife comes out. And he looks at her, and she is the most beautiful woman he has ever seen. And he begins lusting after her. And as he's sitting there eating all this wonderful food that they were bringing him, I mean, it was almost endless. And he's thinking to himself, how am I going to steal that woman away from this man? And as he's sitting there, he comes upon the idea of how he's going to do it. So he's sitting there, and he does something that really shouldn't be done while you're eating somebody else's food. When somebody's treating you really well, you should not do this. He says, oh, this fish is really good, but I think you're using the wrong wood to smoke it. So Raven tells him that, tomorrow morning I'm going to take you out, my friend. I'm going to take you out, and we're going to get the proper wood to smoke fish. Next morning, the sun rises, and they go out into the woods. And they find this big rotten tree, and they cut the tree down. The tree falls over. Back then, you didn't have chainsaws, so you had to use axes, and it was all hard manual labor. You had to use wedges. And the wedges were huge. So Raven would put the wedge up, and then he'd hit it with his hammer. Pop! The wedge falls out. He says, oh, hey, my friend, can you help me? Can you hold on to the wedge? So he grabs the wedge, and he's holding on to that wedge next to the tree, and he's holding it there way out here like this. Raven hits that wedge, and the wedge pops out again. Raven says, no, friend, no. You got to really hold it in there really tight. You can't let it go. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. So he gets there and he grabs that wedge and he's holding it really tight. His head's almost right here. And Raven swings that big old axe and kills his friend. His friend's all dead there. He goes over here and he digs a hole and starts a fire in this hole that he had dug. He goes and cleans up the deer and breaks him down. He throws seaweed in the hot coals and the rocks that are in the pit. And then he throws skunk cabbage on top of that. Then he takes all the meat and the bones and he puts that in there. And then he puts more skunk cabbage on top, more seaweed, and then he puts hot stones on top of that and covers the whole thing. And he goes and he wanders around and he's just biding his time, but he's impatient. His stomach is growling. He's going, oh, deer meat's gonna be so good. So he lifts it up to check and he pulls off the cooked parts that are on the outside. And he's standing there and he's eating this big piece of deer meat and he's looking at that stump, which is right next to the fire. And he's going, oh, stump, you are missing out. This is so good. Too bad you can't taste this. And he finishes the last piece. He goes, wanders off looking for something else to do while he's waiting for the deer to finish cooking. When he thinks it's about done, he goes back. But the stump is over the hole where he's cooking his deer meat. And he's like, goes up to it and he goes, no, what are you doing, Stump? I'll share with you. Don't do this. I'll share with you. Don't worry about it. It's going to taste so good. He can't move the stump because its roots are too deep in the ground. They're holding on to everything. Raven isn't strong enough. Finally, Raven gives up and he wanders around and he comes back and Stump has moved and there's the pit. He's moving everything and nothing but bones are left. There's not even bone marrow for him to eat. That Stump ate everything up. Raven goes back to the house of his friend. And as he's approaching, he sees people going back into the house. And he walks into the door and he looks around and he says, oh, I'm so sorry. A tragedy has happened. While we're cutting the firewood, a wedge popped out of the tree and hit your husband in the head, and he fell off a cliff. The dear woman looked at him, and looked at her family, and they started heading out the door. And just before she disappeared out the door, she says, "We get, everybody knows you're a liar. We know what you did." And she turned into a deer and jumped away, and the whole house disappeared, and he was alone in the woods again. He keeps walking along, and he finally comes down to another beach. And as he's walking along the beach, his stomach is growling because he hasn't eaten anything yet. And as he's walking along, he comes up to a rock, and he stands up on the rock, and he looks out. Oh, what is that out there? Is that a cruise ship? Oh, it's a giant crab, a galmosh. So he calls out, "Hey, galmosh, hasagadan maldagam dakwan. Oh, come here, I want to talk to you." Crab kind of just looks up. I don't want to talk to that guy. That guy looks like bad news. So Raven decides, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I know. I'm going to draw him in with my beautiful voice. Remember, he is a supernatural being, so when he sings sometimes, if he really applies himself, he is even better than the Pied Piper. So this is the song he sang. Ah, yeah, ah, yeah, hey, ah, yeah, ah, yeah, ah, yeah, hey, ah, yeah. Now, while the drumming is happening, Crab's going like this, and he's starting to move. Now, if you all could do that, show me your pinchers while I'm singing. Ah, yeah, ah, yeah, hey, ah, yeah. Crab's about halfway between where he started from, and Crab realizes, what's going on here? Why am I dancing towards that guy? And then he really gets a good look at Clamsham. Clamsham is up there singing his heart out. And Crab says, oh, I know that guy. That's Clamsham. He's bad news for anybody he's interested in. But Crab decides not to stop dancing towards Raven. He says, I'm going to trick the Raven. I'm going to be the only one to ever have bragging rights to say, I tricked the trickster. So Crab starts dancing in closer. Ah, yeah, ah, yeah, ah, yeah. And every time Raven sings, ah, yeah, he closes his eyes really tight. And then, that's when Crab runs up and grabs his wing and starts dragging him down into the water. And Raven is just so distraught. He's really grabbing onto his wing. Raven's pulling as hard as he could. Please, please, my dear Crab, please don't do this. What are you doing? I'm so confused. Why are you attacking me? I just wanted to talk to you. But Crab grabs him even harder after that plea and drags him down. The water's up to here now. And he's still pulling him down. And Raven says, when we get to that rock sticking out of the water, then will you let go of my wing, sweetheart? Crab says, nope. Pulls him again. Now Raven's up to his neck. And he's going, oh, oh, dear, sweet, beautiful Crab, your shell is so beautiful. Your legs are long and slender. Oh, your eyes are like jewels in the ocean. Crab finally has had enough. He grabs his other wing and pulls Raven under the water. Raven's looking him in the eye. Crab's looking him right back, and Crab gives him one extra hard pinch and then lets him go. Raven pops out of the water. His feathers are soaked. He can't fly. But Raven can get just enough that he can run across the top of the water too. So it looks like he's running on water. He gets back up to the rock, and he stands there and he turns around. He shakes off all his water off of him, and he looks out at Crab and he says, "I didn't want to talk to you anyway." And he starts walking off. He's getting really tired now. His wings are hurting so bad he can't fly. He hasn't found anything to eat on these beaches, so he comes out to a peninsula, and rather than walking all the way around, he decides to cut through the woods. And he's cutting through the woods, and he's getting hit with branches and everything because he's so tired he can't keep a straight line. When he finally steps out onto a beach, there's a canoe sitting there. In the bow of that canoe is another beautiful woman. Raven looks at her and he's like, "Oh, you're really pretty. I'm going to take you as my wife." And then he falls and passes out in the canoe. About 3 days later, he wakes up in a beautiful longhouse, maybe one just like this one. And he wakes up, and his new wife comes over and says, "Rest, husband, rest. I've been fixing your wings." Raven starts moving his wings around. "Oh, they feel better. Thank you, my dear." And she goes out, and she comes back with 2 big spring salmon, or king salmon. In our language, we call it yee, because when you catch them on a rod and reel, you go, "Yee!" So he's eating up all that salmon. And this goes on for a long time. Every morning she goes out and she brings in salmon. But she hasn't really seen any storehouses around. Raven gets curious one morning, and he gets up after her and follows her out. He wants to know where she's getting all this salmon. And she goes out there and she's bathing, because we were very clean people, right? And she's out there bathing, and she washes her face and her hair, and she gets all ready for the day. And just before she finishes, she takes up the water and she goes like this. And as the drops fall from her hands, spring salmon would come forth. And they would come to her, and she'd knock them out to feed to her husband. Raven's like, "Oh, maybe I'll keep this one for a little bit longer. This is really cool. King salmon anytime I want." This goes on for a long time, but Raven talks to her about her gift. And he says, "Oh, we should be putting up lots of salmon because I have a big appetite. And summer's going to be over soon." So they start putting up all this beautiful salmon. But Raven is running out of smokehouse wood. So he gets into the canoe and he starts paddling along. As he's paddling along, he sees a school of salmon, and he takes out his beach seine and he circles around them and he pulls them up, loads them up in the canoe. And he says, "Oh, I need more smokehouse wood. I better go get that smokehouse wood." And he goes and finds the perfect tree, and as he was leaving the canoe, he looks up into the trees, and he saw those Juneau ravens quietly eyeing his fish. They weren't really Juneau ravens. There wasn't a Juneau back then. But the ravens were eyeing his fish. So he's like, "I can't just leave this fish here. Those are my fish. They're not their fish." So he comes up with a plan. "All right, this is what I'm going to do." He reaches up, pulls out his eye. He does his magic bit. Little legs pop out, arms, and a little mouth. How many of you have seen Monsters, Inc.? It looks just like Wazowski. He's running around in the canoe. He says, "What do you want me to do, master?" Stands at attention. Raven says, "You watch those ravens and tell me when they try to steal my fish. I'm going to go get some firewood." And he goes off and he starts cutting up trees and getting firewood. And as he's busy doing that, all of a sudden he hears, "Master, master, the ravens are stealing the fish and they're trying to get me." He says, "Go hide in front of the canoe. There's a little spot you can hide. You'll be safe there." He goes and he hides. And he says, "I think they can get me. Their beaks can get me." He's loading up his arms and he's packing all this wood. Remember, he's a supernatural being. He could carry more wood than any of us. He gets out there, and as he's loading it up, he looks and he hears nothing. There's nothing but silence. And as he gets closer to where the canoe was, his empty eye socket begins to hurt so bad. Because the ravens, they love to eat eyes. So maybe that was a mistake on Raven's part to turn his eye into his guardian out there. He gets into the canoe and he sails back to where his wife is. He gets into the house and he says, oh, dear wife, I don't know what happened. Oh, it was just such a tragedy." And she tells him, "Oh, it's okay, husband, it's okay. I'll fix you a brand new eye. Just lay down and rest. I'll get you something to eat, and I'll fix you a brand new eye." A few days pass, and he pulls off the bandage that she had made, and he opens his eye, and it's a little too bright. But he starts looking around. He says, "Oh, I got to try this outside." He goes outside, and he looks around. Oh, it's better than the old one. I think I'll call it my Tlingit eye. If you were from Metlakatla, you would understand what that means. But his Tlingit eye works great. Raven and Spring Salmon Woman are living a great life. Raven decides to take a break from all this harvesting, and he goes to find Stump so he can gamble. Now, if you don't know anything about Tsimshians, they love to gamble. We used to have gambling games. We would bet on anything, and bingo. Now, Raven wins a few rounds of gambling, and then he starts losing. And he starts losing really, really bad. Raven gives up before he loses too much. He goes back, talks to his wife about his bad luck, and blames her for his bad luck. "Oh, you must have done something wrong to give me bad luck. How could I have bad luck? It's all your fault." She convinces him that, no, husband, no. I have done nothing wrong. He says, "Oh, you must be cheating on me with somebody." And she turns around. "It's just you and me here. There's nobody else. Who am I going to cheat on you with?" She finally appeases him, and he says, "Oh, okay, it's not your fault. I'm sorry." And they go about their business, continuing on what they're doing. After a lot of time, it's starting to get cold again. The rain's really coming. That southeast wind is howling out there. Raven has less to do, so he decides, "Oh, I'm going to take some of that fish and I'm going to go gamble with Stump again." And he goes and he gambles with Stump, and oh, he loses so badly. He almost lost the canoe. That's how bad he lost. This time he goes back and He just tells his wife, I know you're doing something wrong. It's your fault that I am having bad luck. His wife just says, okay, here's some food. Feeds him so he can't talk if he's eating. And they go to bed for the night. Before the sun rises, before the ravens call in the morning, she gets out of the house, she gets into her canoe, and she shoves it off a little, and she turns it all around, and she calls to all the smokehouses and the storehouses and says, come, my people, we are not welcome here. We are falsely accused, we are treated poorly, let us leave. And after she said, let us leave, all the salmon came back to life. Their bones and everything grew back, and they came out, and they got into the water with her, and without paddling once, the salmon helped push her canoe off into the distance. Raven wakes up. His stomach was growling. Wife! Wife! Nothing. He walks out of the house and he looks around and where did she go? He continues on. He says, oh, I'm so hungry. And he looks in his storehouse to get some fish. There's nothing in there. He looks in the next one and the next one and there's nothing. Raven says, well, ap meala well, that's the way it is. And he continues on to his next adventure. Now, isn't it funny that we have all met people that say things or do things because it benefits them? Maybe we ourselves have done something like that where we are not totally truthful because we want something to happen that will benefit us. And this is my presentation of Raven as hero and trickster. Thank you.
Well, we have some time for questions. If anybody would like to, in the audience. Thank you for sharing. I had a question. So the Raven stories are a series of similar tales that are shared across the Northwest Coast. I was just curious if you could share any specific details of Raven stories you know that are particular or unique to the Tsimshian.
I would say we have another name besides Clamsham for Raven. It's we get. And usually Clamsham will do good things once in a while, but we get like the spring salmon woman, he does terrible things. He never seems to benefit anyone else other than to be an example for other people of that's not how you should act. But other than that, I'd have to think really hard if there were specific only Tsimshian stories. As far as I know, most Raven stories are universal amongst our people, and I was told that they're all connected. You could go from where he began all the way up the coast until his last story, if there's a last story. Yes?
How many stories are there? And there's more than just Raven, I would take it. There's other creatures, other animals.
Yeah, there's other creatures. You heard one about the deer. We have ones about the octopus, deer and wolf, how they became predator and prey.
And have all these been written down so they're not lost over time?
We have, I think it's 12 or 15 books in our community that the community has written down and translated into English. So
Does your tribe have a written language?
we do now. We didn't before.
Okay.
We have a few language learners in the audience right now, so we're working on it. Right now in our village, we only have one fluent speaker, and it's important that teaching the kids the stories and the songs and the language together helps to keep it alive.
Thank you.
Ooh, right back here.
Thanks, Chief, for sharing your story, for coming to Juneau. Appreciate it. So I have a question. Can you share what hooligan eye, the meaning?
Oh, yeah, I can. So when I was a young person, uncles or whoever was teaching you how to do something, don't use your bad eye, use your hooligan eye, or hooligan eye. Hooligan is our savior fish. It's the first fish to return in the spring, and that gives us a big boost to start taking on the harvesting for the rest of the season. And the hooligan eye is the good one because they're so small, you have to have a good eye to see them.
Yeah, does your state incorporate these stories into the children's literature in school? Are they
Only when
or just in family stories and folk?
Most of the time it's in family stories, but because I'm an elementary school teacher, the kids are learning these stories too.
Formally, through books?
Not through books, but just like I'm doing with you today, orally. There's very few actual books that the kids could follow along with right now, but we're working on it.
Yeah, a number of organizations, including Sealaska Heritage, have published curriculum that's incorporated into the schools as well. Sealaska Heritage, our organization, also has a series of children's books through our Baby Raven Reads series, which you can view in our store. If you're interested in viewing them.
Thank you for these good stories. I know that they've been told for thousands of years and preserved, and I wonder if you know of any stories about when Raven was still white, before, I guess that would be after fire, but before fresh water. Do you know any of like that?
Yes, I do.
Oh.
Yeah. The stories I was told by Arnold Booth was first his top half was turned black during one of the stories. Then the second story, he wanted to show off. And while he was showing off, he wanted to be very colorful. So he took feathers from all the birds and he made this great tail out of it. And he would dance around the fire, and he used pitch to hold those feathers onto his tail. And that pitch, once it gets hot and you get a spark on it, that pitch burns. And you can't really put it out. And that's how his bottom half got burned. And the lesson there was, don't be a show-off, don't be boastful or prideful in a bad way. And then we had one here.
Lukulungan Gori Shangukeidí and Gamas, and Zogan Mouse, Simkeko with a Johon. I said, I'm really happy to see you again, Gamas, and good job, and what you're doing is really important.
Teikweidí.
And a couple of things, especially that I want to comment on, that you mentioned Arnold Booth, and he was my first teacher of our language, and I really loved hearing you say clamshell the way that you do. I know there's a couple of different ways that people say it, but that's the way Mr. Booth said it.
Yeah.
And a cool thing about that last about where Clamson was accusing his Nux of doing bad things to make him have bad luck. That's actually a really old tradition among our people, that there's a set of rules that the wife has to follow while their husband is out hunting or fishing. And if they don't do those right, then they can cause bad luck. So that's kind of neat that that exists in this story. For our ear, it was just, oh, Clamson's being a so-and-so. So he had a little bit of a basis for that, that idea. But I think he was milking a little bit too much.
Yeah. Well, he... Toikson. All right, if we're about done, I do have one more song to share. I would like to thank Sealaska for providing me this opportunity. This has been great fun. Thank you for including the Tsimshian people. I really appreciate that. I've had a lot of fun here today. And I would like to sing this love song to you all. Now, the words to the song is, your fire warms my heart. Your fire warms my home. Your fire guides me. Now, this was written by Gavin Hudson, a very talented music composer from our village, and I would like to thank him explicitly just for the use of this song. I paid him for it, by the way, with a nice carved mask. Ah, oh, hi. Ah, oh, hi. Ah, oh, hi. Oh, ah, oh, hi. Na lagen in Gwenitsin, in dadim zogulaku. Na lagen in lusagemga, na webu. Ya oh hi, oh ya oh hi, ya oh hi, oh ya oh hi, hi, hi. Gonashtish and Toyakson, Hawa.
And thank you so much for sharing these wonderful stories with us. Great lessons. Please join us on Tuesday, May 23rd for our next Raven story lecture told by Tlingit storyteller David Kanosh of the Deisheetaan. Thanks for joining.